Right, hello and welcome to this little demonstration of how to draw a local regional map, which I'll be sending out to all of our Patreons in the next month or so as a reward for supporting the channel. For those of you watching the video, I'm going to take you through how to use Photoshop to generate this map that you can then print out onto two A4 pages, which makes for a fairly decent sized map. Now the goal here is to create something that is a little regional snippet, focusing in on a specific region or territory. And the reason why I wanted to do this was because, well, we've done maps on a continental scale, we haven't done maps on a small scale. And there are, in my opinion, a few little things that we can go through to make them just that much more interesting. So I've opened up Photoshop and I'm creating a new document. I'm going to go with an A3 preset. So I'll click on Create there. Then, because it's this way around, I'm going to rotate it, Image, Rotate Canvas, 90 degrees clockwise, and now I've got my canvas. Now the very first thing that I do, of course, is I create a new layer. The background layer is never going to get used, or maybe I'll use it to fill up something, but other than that, it's not going to be used. Now the important thing to keep in mind, at least I feel anyway, the important thing to keep in mind is the idea of the geography affecting how and where places will be placed, or where you want places placed should indirectly affect the geography so that you can put them in a better position. Now, I know that sounds a little bit like a chicken and an egg kind of story. So the best thing to do when starting to create a map is to decide what is it for. Is it just a little slice of countryside life, or is it a map that your players are going to interact with for a fairly long time and needs to contain quite a lot of information? So in this case, we're going to create a map which contains at least a village or a town. We're not going to map out the town. That's a different kettle of fish altogether. What we're going to do though is we're going to map out what is surrounding this little village, and then we're going to go from there. Now it's slightly different from continental stuff, although I have seen people who've done continental design and development go about this process, but again, this is what I normally use. So I'm going to create an elliptical tool. So I left click and hold it down on the icon here on the left of the screen to create elliptical tool. I'm going to make sure I'm on layer 1, and I'm going to put the village, let's say here. So I want the village to be about there. So I've created that space there, and I'm going to create a green circle. Now you'll see what this means a little later on when we get there. Now something that I like to do is to say everything that's green is a safe zone. Everything that's not green is going to be something else. So there's my village. My players are going to need a little safe zone, say over here. I don't know what that is yet, by the way. I'm not sure what that is, and then I'm going to put a little safe zone down here. Let's make it a smaller one. Okay, so we're going to fill that up. There we go, a little safe zone down there. And I don't think we need any more. So that's creating almost a triangular effect, or space if you like, around where we're going to have our characters interact. Now I have to press Control plus D at the same time to deselect the masking tool, and I can move these around as I like. Something that I've got set up on Photoshop is my snapping layers, my snapping lines. So you can see at the exact center of the page, this would be the layout. So we've got two circles in the lower two quarters, and then we've got one circle slap bang in the middle quarter, and I kind of like that layout. So that's the way we're going to go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make this layer here, say 50% transparent, 30% transparent, somewhere there. This is just to give us an idea of where we're going to encounter good and safe things. Now everything else around it, of course, is fair game. So I'm going to go back to my background layer, create a new layer. This new layer is now going to be where we start laying things out. Now something that my players are interested in encountering is weird and wonderful geography. and I'm going to give that to them in the form of 3 different spaces, hence 3 different areas. And again, it's entirely up to you how you want to plot this out. I'm going to select my lasso tool here, and I'm going to create points. So I'm going to do something like that to create a zone here, and I'm going to choose a different color. Let's go with blue, and I'm going to fill that up there. This is not water, by the way. Control D again deselects that mask. And I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to just do let me do something like this here. Oops, what am I doing? Oh dear, that's going to be an interesting shape. I'm going to do something like that. Alright, and then I'm going to fill that up with a different color. Let's say yellow. There we are. So now it's yellow with a little bit of work in the middle. And then we're going to go and do our last piece, which is down here. And we're going to close that up and fill it in with, well, it doesn't really matter, this is for reference only, a sort of a pink. How hideous. Again, we're going to drop that down to our 30% opacity. So that gives us our 3 distinct zones. So the idea here is that we are going to use these different zones to tell different stories, 3 different adventures, perhaps, maybe even more. We can get up to 6 adventures out of one map. You can get many, many more than that, of course, but 6 adventures to me seems about right, what we can do there. So that's the basic geography layout. So 3 different environments gives me as the GM 3 different opportunities for narrative discussion, as well as the characters for encountering different things. Now what's going to happen in those white spaces? Well, we can think about it. Could be a river, could be a lava flow, who knows? We haven't yet decided on the geography setting itself, because again, as with most settings, we want to check and see what exactly is it that we're going to be portraying here. Now, the party is fairly low level, and they're in a part of the world where it's green rolling fields and life seems pretty good. They are near a mountain range, and the mountain range itself contains, well, vast tracts of frozen Arctic tundra. So what I'm thinking that we should do is the white line is actually going to be the mountain range itself. So wherever there's white, we're going to put in mountain range. Wherever there's blue, I think that should be a nice big frozen lake that's going to have all sorts of weird and wonderful things on it. And then wherever it's pink for whatever reason, wherever it's pink, we're going to throw in some unusual geography. Something that mountain ranges do quite spectacularly is that they usually hold onto the ground. So I think this area is going to be an area of inverted mountainous terrain where we've got floating rocks and things. I think that could be quite fun. And trying to come up with why that's happened is well, it could possibly be the adventure that the people are going to go on themselves. So then this orangey area here is going to be woodlands, farmland, and that kind of thing. So now we've got a basic idea, and it doesn't have to be that extreme, or it could be more extreme if you want it to be. The blue could literally be coastline of water or of a lake of mercury or something equally interesting. Anyway, these are just different options that you can come up with, and by color coding your map, it helps to keep you focused on what you're doing. So now I'm going to go to a new layer, and I'm going to call this layer, mountains, because mountains. Mountains are the integral part to the map here. The mountains are defining our boundaries and borders, and that's something that we have to be cognizant of. So putting them in first makes the most sense to my mind. Now, exactly how I did it on the geography map, I'm going to select my brush tool. I'm going to change my pen to black. My brush size is 15. I'm going to drop that all the way down to about 4. I'm going to make sure it's a hard edge. I don't like the soft edge personally. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to start adding in mountainous detail. Now for that, I zoom in fully. So I'm now at 100%. And this gives you a sense of how much detail you can put into the map at this size. So my mountain ranges, as you know, are usually sort of a crag like that. And then the reverse side of the mountain, which you can then color in or well, color as you so like. So because the mountains form an interesting part of this adventure, I'm going to make sure that the mountains themselves are populated with interesting things. I want my players, when they look at this map, to go, wow, we could go there. Oh, what about that? That looks interesting. What can we do there? Who knows? So I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to create this split mountain so that it looks like it's been shattered or something here. And I'm not too, this is setting my scale as well, by the way. So once I've finished drawing up this basic shape, I'll then know what my scale is for the rest of the map. So again, I'm just sort of drawing here, ad-libbing how I want these mountains to look, and because I'm going to print this out for my players to use, the nice thing is that I don't have to worry about color. Color for me is the part that takes the absolute longest to do. Now I know this yellow zone, and this is what I like about this yellow zone is now supposed to be slightly friendly territory. So I'm going to start to break down those mountains so they're not so dramatic, and they'll ultimately feed into lowland foothills, which are not too daunting for early level travelers. Just do something like that to indicate nice rolling hills leading into these bigger mountains. Now this cleft here, you ask, well, sure, it's some interesting mountains, but that's about it. What else? Well, now I'm going to try my hand, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer here. I'm going to try to draw some kind of spherical object that the players could see. And I'm going to do that and say something like that, and I'm going to put a square temple. This is always tricky. Underneath it, perhaps with a doorway or whatever. I mean, it's this itself would get its own map eventually anyway. And then let's put some spikes off the side just to make it a bit more interesting. And we'll do that and that and that and that and that, and a squiggle, something. So it looks like a Stargate, actually, now that I reflect upon it. But is it? Well, there's only one way to find out. And that is for the players to actually go there and go and find out just what the hell is that object. And we'll finish off the mountain range up here. Just putting in details. I mean, it's really up to you how much detailing you want to put in. I remember reading a lot of fantasy books, David Eddings type of stuff. I don't know if it was in actually his book, but or books I should say, but where they would just do triangles and circles for trees and things. So it was very representational rather than anything else. Now if I zoom out there, I can see the little section of mountain that I've been working on, plus that eye thing. Looks kind of interesting. And I'm going to make sure that I leave a pathway coming in through there. So I'm going to come back, I'm going to zoom back in again. Control plus, by the way, on your keyboard, most keyboards anyway, zoom you in. I'm going to come a little bit closer, and I'm going to draw a road leading through there, leading up to the temple. And I'm going to have my mountains tapering out, because ultimately I want my players to explore this map. I don't want them to go rushing off to the nearest bigger town in a different area. I want them to be curious about it, and of course I'll make them find the map. I'll give it to them as a reward or whatever, and let them see just what treasures there are to be had out there. Alright, so I'm going to send it off down that way. I'm not entirely sure where that road's going to go, but it certainly indicates that there's a road or possibly a river, depending on what I do for the rest of the map. Okay, so I'm now going to carry on with my mountain ranges. I've got quite a long way to go, and when I'm done with that, I will catch up with you again and see what we can do from there in terms of making the map just a little bit better. Don't count foothills, by the way, as dangerous terrain. They can move through that wilderness quite easily. Spiky mountains that are the trouble. At least that's my opinion. Right, so what I will do just before I go quiet is I will plot out, and I quite like this big space here. So what I'm going to do before I carry on with my mountain range is I'm going to just freehand draw a lake, which I want to be in here. And it can actually stretch all the way. This could almost be perhaps the route that our players take in order to get in here. Is they follow this lake. I know I'm committing a violation. This should be in its own layer, but it'll come back to bite me later. Alright, so there's a lake that I want to have. I can see that if I have a river coming down here, the players could follow the river up to the lake, follow the lake up to the next, little habitational zone, and that gets them in there through the mountain range quite nicely. I will put in a passageway, probably around here, and then another one down here, pass that they can take to get through the mountain range into this other territory. But until then, I am drawing mountains. Right, so I had to draw in a river here just to add in my flow of water out of the mountain range, because I realized I might actually just seal away the lake with mountains all the way around it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting in bits and pieces as you go along, as you need to do it. I prefer to sort of create major pieces of geography as I need to, rather than to say draw in all the mountains, then come back, erase some mountains because I need a concourse for a river to flow through. So I prefer to let things sort of grow organically and change from mountains to rivers and that sort of thing. I won't put in things like foliage because generally it doesn't really change stuff too much. Foliage grows over geography. It doesn't really determine geography, not often anyway, unless it's a specific type of foliage, of course, I suppose. But yes, so we've got quite a mountain range growing. What I keep checking, just to make sure that the shape isn't too uniform, that it isn't a continuous line or a straight line, that the mountains seem to move and grow as they need to. Now, I know a lot of people will be looking at it going, oh, but mountains wouldn't form that way, or tectonic activity would cause this or it would cause that. That's all good and well, but I don't really focus too much on that. And if my players question my geography, well, then that's fantastic. Now, something that I wanted to do was this little mountain pass up here. As I was drawing it, I realized that, well, it might not be the most obvious thing. I have tried to make it fairly obvious without making it too obvious. And I thought, well, maybe the villagers would talk about, Oh, if you journey up the pathway until you find the statue of the Maiden in the Breeze, or the mountain that looks like a maiden in the breeze, that's this sort of thing here. I mean, this is a game of imagination, right? So this is my maiden in the breeze. I suppose I can make it more maiden-like. The minus key reduces your brush size without having to go and change it. There we are, maybe that's a bit more maiden-like. I'm not sure. There's the Maiden Mountain. I'd probably call it Maiden Mountain. Her hair's blowing in the breeze. That's what I'm going with. That's what I'm sticking with. So then they can refer to that piece of geography, and there it is on the map, so they can go scouring and have a look at that. Again, it depends on the type of players that you have as well as to just how much information you throw onto the map. For me, if this is a starting area for characters, then I'm going to do my damnedest to make it as interesting as possible, and to make sure that they want to go there and they want to explore and have a look around and see just what's going on there. Anyway, enough from me to destroy mountains. What am I doing? Drawing a mountain in the middle of the lake. Got lost there for a second. Change your brush opacity to 100% to annihilate the... Alright, so I've drawn now this particularly large mountain here in this very strange little shape that I commented on earlier, because in there I've decided I'm going to put a lonely tower of some kind, of some descriptor. So I'm going to, let's say it's got a conical roof type of tower with shingle-like roof tiles. Just do that in there, give it a little point, and then just run it down to its natural conclusion. Put in a door. Put in a doorway of some kind. Round out the base. Maybe give it some brick detailing, nothing fancy. Put a little window in there. Alright, and put it on its own mountainous plateau in the middle of this gigantic mountain range. So I'm going to pull out. We've got oracle orb spherical thing there. We've got a passageway past the female mountain, and we've got this interesting little tower in there as well. So again, it's just ideas for the players to go and explore, and obviously as I'm creating the map I'm looking at it going, well, who lives in that little tower? What's going on there? Is it hostile? Well, it's in the mountainous terrain, which I've listed as being particularly difficult terrain, so who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There isn't a road going there. So there's a reason for that, for sure. And that's something that I'll bear in mind. Yes, it's just an idea. Now, I'm almost done with the mountain range, and I'm looking at it going, well, it's supposed to continue along this way here, but I think I'm going to change it to being a cliff. So this is a plateau, and we drop down onto this pink area. The mountain range I will continue off over here, so I'll be back as soon as that's done. Right, so something that I realised is that this cliff face is quite spectacular in my opinion, and is creating rather an interesting barrier that the players are going to have to work their way around. However, I do want them to be able to get down there at some point without having to go through the mountains, so it gives me as a GM an opportunity to almost shepherd them, if you like, through specific points where I can then create story. So Obviously the players are free to do as they will, and they'll go off and they'll go and explore whatever it is that takes their fancy. Most likely they'll leave the map altogether. However, because I don't want them to do that, I want them to stay focused, I'm going to try and draw them to an area where they can get down this cliff face, and that area is going to be down here. Now, what I was thinking as I was drawing is, what should I put in there? What could I put in there, let's say, will make it interesting? So I think what I'm going to put in here is, and I'm going to draw my little conical tower again. And no, it's not another tower. This is, in actual fact, going to be, and we'll put that there, and we'll do that. This is going to be some kind of monastery-like structure. Wow, that looks terrible, doesn't it? Some kind of monastery-like structure which will hang over the edge of the cliff face and will act almost as a conduit through which others might pass, might gain access to the lower areas. And if I think of what one might expect, you'd be given access to the lower valley via the monastery, and then some kind of catastrophe happens, and then they deny you access back up. So the party will then have to figure out how to get back up to the top of the plateau, which I think is rather interesting from a narrative point of view, from a story point of view, as to how they do that, why are they locked out, what is it that causes them to be locked out. All those kind of things go through my mind as I'm drawing, and I find it a remarkably peaceful space. I put on some music, I zone out, I start drawing, my mind starts thinking, how do we make this map that much more interesting? What can we add in to encourage players to go and explore, go and have a look and go and see what they can find? And I find it particularly enjoyable. So there's the one side of the monastery. I'm going to have the mountain come out of that just to indicate that it's part of the mountain range, built into the mountain crags, somehow, something like that. And do down here as well, and draw my cliff face starting to sprout out of here again. Now, I had no idea how to draw the cliff face. It was just what sort of looked like it would work, and this seems to have done the trick. I'm quite happy with. Let's fill in this area here a little bit. And then side, we're going to have a second tower, or mushroom as these seem to be turning into. And that's going to come down to there, give or take. I am drawing with a mouse, I don't have a stylus or a pen set really. Been meaning to get one, but it's one of those not priority things, so it gets done purchased last. Put that in there. Okay, now to indicate that this is a gateway down, do something like that, just to show the cliff face. And they won't have anything else here, so I'm going to continue my cliff motif from this point onwards. Mountain there, we'll put a little bit of rough terrain here, nothing major. Alright, to indicate that this is a sort of a lift-like system, some kind of rope pulley thing, I'm going to do this kind of illustration. Again, it's more about inspiring the players than being artistically representative. And we'll put a little basket of some kind there. Oh boy. Something like that. The pulley. And I think we can leave it. Leave it like that. And we pull out, what does it look like? I'd buy that as a pulley system down into the lower plateau. Getting our players down there. And I'm going to draw a road. Now, the curves that the road takes, especially in the medieval era, usually those curves were around major obstacles or natural phenomenon. They didn't have the capacity or the necessity, really, of driving through mountain ranges and things. So I'll do that so that I know where I'm going. I'll bring back in again. Yeah. I'll have the road going in there. Alright, so we know that it connects. I'm just going to take out this last little piece down here. It makes the basket seem relatively unimportant. Alright, so now I'm going to carry on the cliff face. I don't have a huge amount left to do here. This side anyway. If you've got thoughts or ideas on how to design cliff faces, leave it in the comments below. Let us know. Share and share alike. Now, obviously, one of the things that people will comment on and will make mention of, and rightly so, is that there are map generators out there, map generation software that will do automatic mountain range here, mountain range there, let there be light kind of stuff. It's there. It's very good stuff. It's very good software. It allows you to knock out maps very quickly. However, I find that in its speed, in its simplicity of click button mountain range is formed, you lose a certain intimate familiarity that you have with a map that you have manually drawn and spent several hours busy making. And that's something that I find very important, is it's useful for you to know your geography of the terrain of the area implicitly, and to be able to remember that, oh yeah, you sneezed when you were drawing that mountain range, and so that's why it's got that funny sort of shape. And maybe there's a legend about a sneezing giant who sneezed so much that he eventually blew his own head off, and wherever his mucus-filled head landed and rolled, it left these sludge pools, or so the rumor goes. You know, however you want to do it. I mean, it's entirely up to you. But for me, this process is part of the creative process. It's part of the story process. It gets the little coy cells moving in a direction, and they probably forget them when it comes down to it, but maybe they don't, in which case then I've got basically a whole other adventure, a whole other story that I can then play out. Alright, so that's that cliff face and mountain range done. We've got a definitive cliff face there, broken every now and again by little mountain ranges and things. I've sealed it off down there so the players don't try and walk around it. I'll just tell them, well, you can't. So now all I have to do is finish off this territory here. And as I've been drawing, again, I've been thinking about it, going, well, is the inverted geography really that much of a good idea? What should be down there in that pink area? Lava? I'm going to do a bit of a mixture, I think. And this blue area, what are we going to do with this blue area? We said frozen tundra and that kind of stuff. Is it that exciting? Can we do more? I think we can, and I'm going to try and do that. I'm just going to take a brief break. I'll be back shortly. Okay, so I am now back and ready to carry on with this mountain range progress. And the more I've thought about it, the more I think that that white band of mountains, if I continue it, I think will be very disruptive for my players in terms of moving around this map. And I'm not too keen on that. I think that once they've crossed the mountain range, I want them to be in a space where they are contained, but at the same time they are able to relatively easily move across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the rest of the mountain range from being mountains to being a swamp-like substance. So there is always a difficulty of getting across, but the challenge type becomes different. It becomes a different set of skills. It allows me to challenge different aspects of the player's characters, allows potentially different characters to shine in terms of resolving their movement through the wilderness. That was a video that I did a couple weeks ago, I think, where we were looking at how to make wilderness that much more interesting, and one of the ways was to utilize different skills other than the traditional outdoorsy type of skills, so that other characters can shine and contribute to the overall movement of the party through those different types of terrain. And that's a philosophy I very much believe in, and I think that if we change up the type of terrain in there, we will get the ability to enact that preference for involving others. So my foothills are going to peter out, my mountains are going to peter out into foothills here. And we will design our swamp as we go. Now, I don't think this is the only mountains that we're going to have on this map. I think there are going to be others, potentially something here, although I'm not sure. Probably, most definitely, most likely 900% chance of something here, and maybe some kind of crest of mountains around here, depending on what this is. I haven't yet fully decided what it's going to be. Inverted geography is interesting, but is it something that is going to feature in the world? Is it going to be something special? If it's something special, then it needs to be in a self-contained space. I'm thinking now that maybe our plans should change completely, and the pink area should be swamp, and we can throw in some interesting stuff there. And then the blue area can be our area of fractured terrain, where we've got inverted mountains happening, inverted hills and things starting to happen, so that the map isn't too focused on ice and that kind of thing. We will have that still, definitely, but it will be a little bit less hectic, I think, because the players, if I saw a giant shelf of ice, I really wouldn't want to go there unless there was something very specific happening. So we'll have to think about that one. Right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to draw in our swamp area. So I'm going to name that as something else. I'm going to create a new layer here, call it swamp. Okay, and then come down into this zone here. And now the swampy stuff, I'm going to draw that slightly differently to how I've normally done it. I think it's going to take me a long time. So before I do that, you said going backwards and forwards. Before I do that, I'm just going to draw in a little low range of mountains here, because I quite like the idea of this town or village or whatever it ends up being, sort of being nestled in amongst this very small range of hills protecting it. One almost can imagine that the hills cause the dry land, which keeps the swamp at bay. allowing people to live there. Now, why would adventurers want to go into a swamp? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? It's a very good question, and one that you'll have to answer at some point in terms of what adventures you set in that swamp. And there's no reason for you not to allow the characters to wander in on their own, if you like, or you can prompt them, of course, with an adventure. Off the top of my head, you've got lost temples, lost treasure, the rescuing of fair maidens who've been taken away by swamp people. You've got an entire war that can happen between lizard folk and them that reside there. There's just an array of potentials that pop out when someone says swamp. So I quite like the idea of swamp. I'm going to come down here. And speaking of lizard folk, actually, let's zoom out again. Come on. Press the right buttons and you'll go in the right direction now. So if I zoom out here, I quite like the idea of lizard folk controlling a specific area, and there being a conflict over that and about that. And so I think that's what we're going to do. Now, I do feel we still need a little bit more interesting geography in here. And I think we're going to have the lake is interesting, but the lake is not big enough. This lake up here, and that's serving a particular function. I think we're going to have another lake down here, something that can get the players really interested in coming down here. Or the lizard folk will put up here, controlling this space here, and that's what's causing conflict with the humans, or whoever resides here, humans, halflings, whatever you want to choose, who are now trying to push up into their territory, or just survive from the encroaching swamp-like morass. But now that we're busy talking, now that the juices are flowing, that the mind is going, I'm wondering if maybe this shouldn't be the carcass of a creature that's growing. So some kind of giant beast landed and died there, and its entrails are starting to morph or evolve into this living carpet of deadly, horrific, nasty, manky, terrifying stuff. And that's what originally created such a fertile valley, which is what inspired that little green spot down here. So some beast or other died, and it's now starting to creep out. I quite like that. Then this area up here needs to be very different from the swampy area that will be down here. So it's not going to be swamp. I'm going to rename this carcass, and it's misspelled. That's okay. I know what it means. I'm going to come in here and say about this big. I'm going to draw the head of some horrific creature which has died. Now this is the eye socket. As you can clearly see. I'll do that just to make it feel a little bit more like it's got depth. So there's the eye socket, and give it some more of these spikes. So it's some kind of terrifically large monster. Underneath that, usually you get this sort of cheekbone. This usually leads into the upper soft palate. I will do something like that. And then the top of the skull comes down to the snout. Make the snout bulge out in that kind of direction, and then come back, because usually the nose is soft tissue. And then go down here into that. And we'll do that and that. And just for detailing, do this. Okay. There, we've got that there, we've got the top of the head now, which may end up in a boss of this kind of proportion. And that has a horn which is going to come down. In this kind of direction. Give it a pattern so that it's obvious what it is. Something like that down to there. This needs to finish off. Skull's done that. It can do that, and then we have one by vertebra, which will get do something there, and another one which will do something there, and then another one which is sort of submerged into the swamp. So we're getting something looks like that. Now, as you can see, it might be a little bit too big. I'm not sure, though. I kind of like it as this epic scale piece, which we then will develop further. So I'm going to leave it at this big. Now, we've got it as a separate layer, so if we really don't like it at that size, we can develop that as we go, and then of course, these terrific teeth which dig into the swamp. We come out. No. Alright, so this beastie's body has collapsed here and is giving rise to this dark substance that's growing and taking over this land. So I'm going to have a little bit more of it here so we can get a sense that its spine maybe sticks around there. We'll put a paw there, maybe a little bit more of the spine here, and then it's finishing off down here. So it's like this long serpentine beast. And then we'll figure out how to draw the terrain so that it looks like, yeah, it looks slimy and gore-filled. And I think that makes quite an interesting terrain. Not a unique terrain, but an interesting terrain. And will certainly give us the opportunity of having all kinds of encounters we may so choose to have. And I think it makes for some interesting encounters with the creatures that are feeding on this thing. Maybe there are monsters that have moved into the area. Maybe there's a mage who wants them to go and find more bits and pieces of this creature. It really starts to make itself tell a story, and that ultimately is our goal. And that, as you will have noticed, came out of just some ramblings going, well, it'll be a lava field, or it'll be a this, or I didn't need to go through that whole process. We had the idea emerge over time, and that for me is far better, far more interesting than going in with a fixed plan already. I'm going to scroll around, by the way. You just press spacebar and you get this little hand symbol. That allows you to move around the map. without having to switch buttons and all that kind of stuff. Alright, so this is now a collapsed paw of whatever this beast was. And you can see that I'm not the world's greatest artist by any means, and that's not the point. The point is to get your players to want to come here to explore this bizarre world where there's this gigantic being of clearly draconic origin of some kind, that they may be able to plunder or find its loot or something. I don't know. That sort of looks paw-like. Sort of. Again, once I've worked out the swamp detailing, that would be easier. In there, we want some sort of archway. Oh, some ribbed here would be great, wouldn't it? So, oh, some ribs for dinner would be great too, actually. That's not going to happen now. Alright, so we'll do that. We'll do this. And then I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We'll do the ribs of doom. These are getting in my way, actually. So I'm going to erase you quickly. Never be afraid to erase. Admit a mistake and move on. So that's pretty cool. And then in here, a few last vertebrae. That will signify the size of this creature anyway to our party, hopefully. Maybe because this looks like a big blank space over here. Put in now we're going to have to come up with a with all sorts of things, aren't we? And one of the things I've just realized is if the players aren't interested in coming down here, let's say for example they think that it's too high level for them, or there's a problem and they don't want to come down here, one of the solutions that you can have is while they're at the tavern they get offered this cheap soup that's got quite a meaty flavour to it and is actually not too bad. And then they discover that what the townsfolk have started to do is use this beast, use it for the cooking pot. And if that doesn't freak them the hell out, I don't know what. As they look over the gorge at this living organism, there's the villagers down there quite happily hacking into this blood sack that's just lying there growing slowly. Not sure what it's feasting on, but they don't care. I think that in itself would freak out a few players. I I think certainly a lovely moment that they discover as they're eating why it's so cheap. Well, we don't have to grow it, we just have to go and cut it out of the ground, don't we? So, can't charge very much for it, it's just lying around. No one using it. Those are a little bit big. I'm going to use my lasso tool here and just draw around them. Goodbye. And I'm not going to scale them down because then the width of my line shrinks down as well. So if anyone knows how to fix, that you can scale without changing the thickness of the line, please let me know. But it wasn't particularly difficult to draw. It's just about creating the sense that this carcass is massive. Yeah, that's a bit better. Right, so there's our skeleton creature remains lying in the pink area, and now we need to figure out how to swampify this so that it looks like this whole thing is in a horrific swamp of some kind. And I'm going to take a break and grab a cup of coffee, and I will be back.